Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for MiltonRose Learning with another Let's Learn video on the fall of Berlin and the end in the Pacific 1945. So we're coming very much to the end of the war now and the defeat of the Axis powers. So we're going to look at the context and the causes, so what was driving the defeat of the Axis powers. We will look at a really nice chronology for you, like we normally do, to beef up your history notes. We'll look at a big turning point as well at this very late stage in the war. And then we'll finish by rounding off by looking at the tertiary, secondary and primary significance of the fall of Berlin and the end of the Japanese Empire. Okay, so let's dive in. So what was really driving the defeat of the Axis powers at the end? Well, as always, there's a number of factors. So the first one was, for me, the strategic encirclement of the Reich. So converging fronts. So the Western Allies had crossed the Rhine by this period, and Soviet forces were driving across the Polish plains to the Oder River, which is the last major river before you hit Berlin. Trapping Germany in a closing strategic vice. Okay, they were just being squashed, basically. And the Yalta Conference of February 1945, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin agreed on unconditional surrender, which we kind of reaffirmed that position, and also the division of Germany into 4 occupation zones, as well as Japanese entry into the war against Japan to finish them off. And you can kind of see, for visual learners, they're kind of splitting up
Kaum zu Port Nelson besetting
Germany here.
Impfen aus Matchen im Samwebler beginnen am 12.
breaking
Inciting
up
one.
the kind of country into 4 zones of occupation. Okay, well they will when they've finished the war at least. Now, number 2 then, we have the Pacific Island War and attrition. So I would say here then, the US engaged in quite a successful island hopping strategy. So US naval and amphibious forces bypassed heavily fortified atolls. So if they didn't like the look of it, they just go, I'll leave it, we'll just let it wither on the vine. And they went towards other islands to seize airfields within direct striking range of Tokyo. Okay, obviously the capital of the Imperial Empire of Japan. And the unconditional surrender stance then, so in the Potsdam Declaration of July 1945, demanded immediate Japanese surrender or face prompt and utter destruction, which was an allusion to the atomic bomb. So again, the Japanese are very, very much on the back foot here. And also total war and strategic bombing, as you can see by the atomic bomb test there. So there's destruction of Axis infrastructure. So strategic bombing by the RAF and the United States Air Force destroyed German and Japanese industrial centres, transportation networks, and ultimately civilian morale, although the German population never truly fractured and broke, but they were beaten down by the end of the war. And on top of that, we have the Manhattan Project, which was the code name for the secret US development of the atomic bomb, concluded with a successful Trinity test in July 1945, which you can see in the image. So there's a lot of things driving the Axis defeats, to be fair, and they're really, really on the back foot in this the back end of the war. So let's get a tighter read on these events now with a really good chronology for your notes. So February to March 1945, we have Iwo Jima and crossing of the Rhine. So the Battle of Iwo Jima, which is an island very close to the Japanese home islands, February to March, US Marines capture the island after very intense fighting, securing emergency airstrips for their B-29 bombers to then go on and bomb the home islands of Japan. And they were using, firebombing techniques of Curtis LeMay. This was decimating Japan, let's put it that way. The crossing of the Rhine then as well in March. So the US forces capture the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. There's a very famous old film about it as well, which is quite a good watch. And British and Canadian forces crossed under Operation Plunder. So they're breaking through the German western frontier. And as I was alluding to, there's a firebombing of Tokyo on the 9th and 10th of March. So Operation Meeting House ignited firestorms across Tokyo, and it destroyed 16 square miles of the capital. Okay, this was, you can find images on YouTube. Tokyo, was absolutely flattened by these bombings. It was extremely effective, but also horrific kind of bombing of Japan. Then we have April to May 1945. We have the Battle of Berlin and VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. So the Red Army assault on Berlin starts roughly 16th of April. Over 2.5 million Soviet troops under Marshal Zhukov and General Konev launched the final assault on the German capital. Okay, so this is pretty much it for Hitler. So Hitler's death on the 30th of April. So Adolf Hitler commits suicide in the Führer bunker in the middle of Berlin as Soviet forces fought to within yards of the Reichstag. He kind of left it to the last second and then chewed on cyanide and a bullet to the head at the same time. So yeah, so it was a pretty grim end and very pathetic for such a figure. And VE Day was declared on the 8th of May 1945. That was where General Alfred Jodl signed Germany's unconditional surrender at Reims, ending the war in Europe formally. Okay, so basically Nazi Germany is no more. Then the Japanese are still fighting though. So April to June 1945, the Battle of Okinawa, which is even closer to the Japanese home islands, the gateway to Japan. So the bloodiest island battle in the Pacific cost over 12,000 US killed. That's quite a number, and more than 100,000 Japanese military and civilian casualties. This was, really, really brutal part of the Pacific War, and it brought forth a kamikaze, and you can see a very famous image of a kamikaze there, basically mass suicide plane attacks to inflict very severe damage on Allied naval vessels supporting the landings. So the kamikaze start to make a kind of an appearance on the battlefield, very scary for the US sailors. And invasion planning, so casualties on Okinawa directly influenced the US leadership's estimates for what they called Operation Downfall, which was their proposed invasion of the Japanese mainland. They saw how tough it was on Okinawa, and they thought, wow, this is going to be even worse on the Japanese home islands, which then influenced their decision to drop the atomic bomb. Okay. Then we have, bringing us to the next stage then, the last step of the chronology, August to September 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. So the atomic bombs on the 6th and the 9th of August, so the B-29 Enola Gay, it was so named after the captain's mother, dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. That was the code name for the first bomb. And 3 days later, Fat Man, the second bomb, was dropped on Nagasaki. Okay, so atomic warfare is very much here, and those cities were flattened. Absolutely horrendous casualties. Soviet invasion of Manchuria in the Far East on the 8th of August. Over 1 million Red Army troops attack Japanese forces in Manchuria, eliminating hopes of Soviet mediation. So basically Japan is really on the ropes here. They've got nowhere to turn diplomatically or militarily. And VJ Day is on the 2nd of September 1945. So Japan formally signs the instrument of surrender on the USS Missouri battleship in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. And you can see that being done in the image. Okay, so a lot going on in the end of the war, wasn't there? And as you can see, what's the turning point? Well, for me, you can debate this, but at the end of the war, I think the turning points are the Reichstag falling and the atomic strikes on Japan. So first off, the total defeat of Nazism, raising the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, marked the complete destruction of Nazi regime and German militarism. It's dead and buried now. Okay, so Nazi Germany is consigned to the dustbin of history, to paraphrase Leon Trotsky. But also another turning point is the entry into the nuclear age. The deployment of atomic weaponry forces Japan's immediate surrender, but it also brings us into a brave new world of atomic diplomacy. So the whole world changed here, and you can see for visual learners kind of the atomic test here, just to get a read on this. Look at that bomb. It's just crazy. The world will never be the same again, and we've entered the nuclear age. Okay, so those are the key events for us at the end of the war, 1945. Now let's step back as historians and just think for a second, what's the historical impact and significance of the events that we've just described? Well, in terms of tertiary significance, those are kind of thirdly significant ones, not quite as important, but still noteworthy. The establishment of the modern global order. So the founding of the United Nations in 1945, which is an institution which is still with us, replaced the failed League of Nations with a stronger collective security framework and a permanent Security Council, which is still in operation. It's not a perfect institution by any means, but it's a level up from the League of Nations. Okay, so that was a big thing. The decline of the European empires as well. So the financial and physical destruction of Britain and France accelerated post-war decolonisation. They basically lost their empires over time in Asia and Africa. So they fall back into just middle-ranking powers. Then we have secondary significance. It was, as I was saying earlier, the dawn of the nuclear age and Cold War bipolarity. There's basically two poles of power now. There's America in the West, and there is Russia and its kind of future allies once they get the Eastern Bloc running. So it creates the start of a nuclear arms race. The atomic bombings marked the end of World War II and the immediate start of the nuclear arms race, because Stalin was not going to let America just have a nuclear monopoly for very long. The Iron Curtain, so the division of Europe into American-backed Western democracies and Soviet-dominated Eastern satellites, starts to initiate the Cold War. Okay, so it sets the scene, or it moves the pieces around the game board, if I can put it that way, to kind of prepare for the start of the Cold War. But then in terms of primary significance, what's the most immediate things for me? Well, first off, it's a total elimination of Axis military power and their political regimes. Unconditional surrender. So it completely dismantled the Nazi dictatorship and Japanese militarist regimes. They're swept away from history, clearing the way for post-war demilitarization and democratization in both of those nations. And they've both gone on, as we know, to become extremely successful democracies. It also brought the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials. So it established new international legal precedents for prosecuting war criminals, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. So it really set the scene that people could not get away. You couldn't escape justice. Now, that doesn't mean to say that some of the criminals didn't escape justice, because they did. Okay, people such as Joseph Mengele and horrible people like that. But nevertheless, there was a direct effort to put them on trial, and you can see an image there, very famous, the Nuremberg trials with left to right. I think it's Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, and it looks like Wilhelm Keitel, who was the head of the German army for part of the war, all being put on trial and kind of, and if need be, executed. So I think those are the primary significances, and you can see it brought to a close the most destructive human conflict in our history as a civilization, and hopefully something like that never ever happens again. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of given you a really good primer now for 1945, the fall of Berlin and the fall of the Japanese Empire. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss another Let's Learn video again. If you have any comments, please do. Just pop them in the comments and we'll always do our best to reply on YouTube. And it just remains to say, to be honest, thanks for listening. And we will obviously be preparing the next the final video in the series very, very soon. So take care, and we'll see you soon.